Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Psychedelic Entrepreneur. Today, I'm really excited to have Mareesa Stertz with us. Hi, Mareesa. Thanks for being here.
So glad to join you.
So, Mareesa is a filmmaker, community organizer, and a KRI certified Kundalini yoga teacher. She is a co-founder and media director at Lucid News and the producer and host of the documentary series The Healing Powers of Psychedelics and Other Mindful Practices, currently streaming on Gaia TV. Mareesa is also the founder of the Psychedelic Leadership Summits and holds connection workshops focused on building relationships within the community. Her main focus has been to tell stories of healing, which has taken her all around the world, filming with the curanderos of Peru to the holy men of India. She has a BA in cinema at San Francisco State University, and her documentaries have been featured by Gaia TV, Viceland, Indigenous Films, Mary Jane, and Participant. Her debut feature film on the spiritual intentional community Dominhor. My God, my COVID brain is killing me. Was recently released and is available on Gaia TV. Yes, I'm actually just a disclaimer for everybody listening. I am recently recovering from COVID and my brain has never been this dysfunctional in my life, but I'm pretty good considering. So Mareesa, thank you so much for sharing your story here. I would love to know what got you on this path to co-founding Lucid News, to doing these documentaries, to sharing all these incredible stories of healing and consciousness expansion. Was this the path you were always on? Or, tell us your story of your upbringing and your career path.
Oh, wow. It's such a big, I feel like I was always on it without realizing it. There's times where I'm like, wow, every single thing has happened in my life to get me at this place, at this age with these skills. I had a lot of trauma as a child. And though my family was amazing and did their best and did great in so many ways, they also inherited a lot of bad programs on how to discipline, and some of that it was in the realm of abusive behavior. And I took it really personal as a child, and I ended up having, I guess what falls into PTSD and severe anxiety and low self-esteem and all these issues. And I always knew growing up that there was something was wrong. There was something that could be better. And also the philosophy I'd been taught is chin up, just keep moving on. Like, the past is the past, just get over it, and now matters. And that philosophy was one that I really tried to implement throughout my 20s and my 30s. And it wasn't getting me anywhere. I was living a life of repeated struggle and failure to thrive in my relationships, in my work, in paying bills, in everything. I once did a little wheel of life chart. There's this idea of you section out the different parts of your life. And in the middle is the zero, and on the outside is you're thriving. And I had the smallest, most misshapen wheel because I was close to the zeros on all these pieces of life: money, finances, relationship, etc. So I knew there was room, and I was too stuck in scarcity to get out, the room for improvement, and too stuck to move. And eventually I rediscovered psychedelics. I had already played with them and had cool experiences at a young age, but I rediscovered psychedelics more intentionally in my mid-30s, and it was simultaneous to me discovering documentary filmmaking. And as I was unpacking my own healing in psychedelics, I was like, wait a minute, nobody else really knows how this works. I should document this. Like, the world needs to know. It's important. These are amazing tools, and this knowledge needs to get out. And so with that was the genesis of the Healing Powers and Lucid News and any sort of storytelling around psychedelics that I do.
Amazing. I love it. And I hear you a lot on that, the programming, right? And the just get over it, and like, oh, that's over and it doesn't matter. And then waking up, and I remember saying to a therapist in my 20s, like, oh, I have no trauma because my family, like it was kind of okay, like no one was murdering each other and nothing like that serious happened. But when I finally realized the extent of what trauma really was, I was like, wow, like it's nothing but trauma. So, but let me ask, I'm just curious, before you got into the documentary filmmaking, what were you doing for your work in your 20s and 30s?
I had been so a lot of the 20s was in college and waiting tables on a boat that sailed around the bay in San Francisco and eventually bartending. Alcohol was a big part of my life and my coping mechanisms for all that trauma that was stuck in my system. And then, yeah, moving to LA, also more waiting in restaurants. And then I'd been doing music videos to build on that film career that I was pursuing, and short films, but I was spending more of my own money and putting myself in credit card debt to fund those than making money. They were a big, it was all about gaining experience is what that was about. So I'm glad I have it, but I did not make any money.
Great. So for those who haven't heard about Lucid News, can you tell us a little bit more about what it is, how it came about, who you co-founded it with, and what the mission is about with Lucid News and when you guys started this?
I mean, I think all the other publications, everybody has a specific focus and they have a specific audience. And they have everybody has their own approaches. So what I think what we kind of the gap that we aim to fill is unbiased news and really making it both accessible to people new in the space as well as people who are more deep in the space, and creating that bridge between both the community and the investors and the researchers and the indigenous, and really aiming to be a central point for all of those. So, and I think a lot of all the other publications out there are awesome. They're all doing such good work. And I feel like most of them are geared a bit more to a specific realm. And so my hope is that we are holding a good bridge in between all of the realms.
Yeah, I'm curious, how is Lucid News different than, excuse me, let's say the other publications that are out there in the psychedelic space? Because it is all of a sudden everything has come on hand, right? Like there's other publications, there's other websites, I don't even know who I follow anymore, who does what. There's companies that are reporting, but then they actually have their hands in something else. What makes Lucid different?
I mean, I think all the other publications, everybody has a specific focus and they have a specific audience. And they have everybody has their own approaches. So what I think what we kind of the gap that we aim to fill is unbiased news and really making it both accessible to people new in the space as well as people who are more deep in the space, and creating that bridge between both the community and the investors and the researchers and the indigenous, and really aiming to be a central point for all of those. So, and I think all the other publications out there are awesome. They're all doing such good work. And I feel like most of them are geared a bit more to a specific realm. And so my hope is that we are holding a good bridge in between all of the realms.
Nice. Okay, that's good. That clears up a lot of the information that I was wondering about. So, you mentioned something about speaking into or covering news in, let's say, the business space. The venture capital, the big companies that are popping up left and right, and then also the indigenous and maybe subjects around sacred reciprocity. I'm curious, as someone who's an insider in this world, do you see this quote industry? I never know what else to call it. I still have some issues saying that, but that's the reality. We're now in a psychedelic industry, I guess. Do you think that these two areas can work together, and are they working together? Like, what does the future hold for, let's say, the venture capital along with the indigenous communities and sacred medicines?
Okay, yeah, this is indeed a really important endeavor that I think really is essential to the successful evolution of psychedelics coming out into the world on a pharmaceutical basis, is that having the perspective of the indigenous on panels for these investors in order to inform how these tools come out. I'm seeing it also as a difficult process and a delicate process that's not going to be something that's going to run smoothly until kinks really get worked out. And I think that there's a big part the investors have to educate themselves on the ways of the indigenous, to understand, I mean, things grow at the speed of trust. And trust comes when people see things on the same page. And in order for there to be reciprocity, in order for things to come back to the indigenous, profit needs to not necessarily be the biggest, the first thing on your list that needs to be accomplished, right? And so this is a whole shifting of a program that needs to happen where I think some companies are on board with it, and as they move forward and they receive the support of the community and they unfold successfully, I think that becomes a North Star. We're seeing this in other companies when companies are taking care of their employees and companies are operating in balance with the resources they're using, they're getting a lot of extra support from their consumers. And I think this is like proving to be a worthwhile methodology. And so my hope is that this continues and we see this with the cooperation between indigenous and the investment.
Yeah, it's so well said. And that is the reality where I personally believe we do have to learn how to hold both. I mean, this is the world that we're in today. There's a demand for healing with psychedelics, and there's a demand for help. People need help. Because I've even had people say like, oh, we need to stop all this, and these medicines should just be free. And I mean, it's like there's one extreme and then there's the other, which is, like, okay, let's just profit and, another capitalistic, version of big pharma heading into psychedelics. And I do believe there has to be a solution. There has to be this middle ground that brings everyone and like you said, like not putting the money first, maybe putting the healing and the benefits of these medicines before anything, or having that kind of manifesto for this business that we do always build the sacred reciprocity into our model. I mean, that's my hope. And this is why I've been asking, the insiders who are on the front lines reporting and seeing what's going on. Like, is this something that you've seen as being built into these models with a lot of these companies and venture capital and, even these, I don't know what to even call them, like pharmaceutical companies that are now starting up that are kind of tapping into this space? Like, are they building in this right relationship into their business model?
I see a lot of companies trying to do that. And then I also hear a lot of indigenous folks feeling really frustrated by the process, that they're walking away being like, yeah, they wanted to hear what I said, and it looks good for them to hear what I say. It looks great for me to be on their panel, but did they actually implement the advice and the consultation we offered? Not really, and it's this is the frustrating thing to see is the urgency of we need to make money, we need to make profit, is not going to roll smoothly with the input from the wisdom of the land, and so there's the burn, and somehow the two need to work together.
Yeah, no, it's very well said. And we'll see, like this is the beginning, right? We're only at the beginning of all this. And I do believe just having these conversations is important to getting this discussion out there. I keep saying, I'm like, well, are people even going to support these businesses when they see the transparency of their practices? I don't know. I mean, I personally am very particular about who I support and where my money goes and who I choose to even platform, on this podcast, things like that. So we'll see. But Mareesa, let's go into a little bit more about the work that you're doing with film and storytelling. So tell us a little bit about your intentions with creating these films, with producing the Leadership Summit, with some future projects you have going on. How is film impacted your own healing, and how has your healing impacted the films that you put out there and the work that you do in the world? Like, how are they intertwined?
My favorite subject.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, my intention with creating all this content is really to celebrate the healing journey and to basically create more conversations around it. And it has been so much that, I don't know, it's interesting. I created a lot of my the healing powers when I was very much in my own programs of scarcity and struggle. And at the same time, I was like, I know I have something really valuable that could really hopefully help a lot of people. But it was created in my old program. And, you know, it got out there, but it didn't quite have the explosive impact I had hoped. I was also very much running on the like, oh my God, if this doesn't get out soon, somebody else is going to beat me to the punch and it won't be relevant and blah, 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 you know, and all of that energy that I was operating with came into the project, and I really feel like it's a reflection of it. So when you say, how does my own healing interface with the creation? You know, it did something, and it did something good that I'm proud of. But I believe I built out of scarcity, and that was the impact it made reflects it somehow, maybe not directly, but indirectly. However, it was also a good stepping stone and it's a good learning thing. And I feel very strongly that we need to not be afraid to fail or to not do things perfect. And so, you know, I laid those beginning steps and have been since, like, educating myself and recognizing what I didn't know and how to do things differently as my work continues. I continue to get the message of slow down, ground yourself. How can you come from a centered place where you are well resourced and where there's enough time, and it's not based out of a fear that somebody else is going to beat you to it, or, you know, that there's not enough money, or da 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 da. How can you start creating out of trust that everything is there to help you grow and it's working exactly the way it should in service of your own evolution? So from that place, I'm now creating content that I'm feeling a lot more secure about and a lot more excited about. And I feel when I speak about it and put it out that it makes impact in a more effective way than what I did in my earlier stages. So yeah.
It's incredible. And I love talking about this because it sounds so familiar. You know, I'm on my third business now, and my previous two businesses, it was the same thing. I mean, it was a struggle. I'm very grateful for them because they brought me to where I am now. But looking back on it, it was like, whoa, like the level of fear and doubts and insecurities and scarcity mindset, and just that pain. But it was also my greatest teacher. You know, it was like the healing, the depths of my healing came through that period of my life. And now, yeah, it's like now I'm at this level of trust. And of course it's a journey, right? Every day, I don't know about you, but every day I'm constantly reminding myself, like, oh yeah, like you have to just trust. And there is nowhere to go, and there's nowhere to get to. And, you know, we're all programmed to believe that there's this, like, you know, grabbiness that we must like beat each other, and there's a race, but there actually isn't. And it's that was very much my own journey of like really just taking a deep breath and slowing down and remembering that this is, you know, this incarnation is just a path, and there is no like end game. And, you know, it's not serving us or humanity to be coming from that energy. I'm curious, you know, your path of healing, because, you know, you've talked about trauma and scarcity, and this sounds so much like mine as well. How did this come? Did your healing just come through the medicines, or did you have other practices? And tell us a little bit more specifically about, you know, what kind of medicine and what you were doing that really shifted from where you were to what's coming through now in this place of trust.
Good stuff. I feel like psychedelics was one of the most instrumental tools in my journey, for sure. I actually let me see. I think actually psychedelics and spirituality, and meditation. So I was raised hardcore born again Christian as a child, and I had it really like, yeah, it was super intense in Las Vegas of all places. And to my parents who were immigrants from Germany and Austria, it was a really weird childhood. And and amazing, like I'm excited. I'm glad that there was so much going on. But it was really intense. And I, as a young kid, really pondered the meaning of life and like, what's this idea of heaven and hell? And like, I questioned my pastors and asking like, okay, well, how does hell work? You know, or how does heaven work? Wouldn't you get bored if it's perfect all the time? And you know, if you're a soldier and you have to kill to protect your country, are you going to hell because you killed? Or if you steal to feed your family, are you know, how does this work? And they never had good answers for me. It was really frustrating. And so at a young age, I think I was like maybe 11 or 12, I was like, after a year of praying at church every Sunday, being like, all right, God, if you're there, give me a sign. I never got a sign. Crickets. People around me were falling over in fits of tongues, and I'm getting crickets. And I'm like, all right, I don't believe this. I'm letting it go. I might go to hell if I'm wrong, but I'm letting it go. And yet my soul was always yearning for some meaning making in it all. And I was, like I said, in Las Vegas, so we were definitely like substances were around, and I did mushrooms when I was 15. I was going to concerts and smoking pot, and did LSD when I was 18, and MDMA and yeah, MDMA and LSD when I was 18, and I had some spiritual epiphanies at this young age. One being that we're all connected, and we're all love, and this like I had no idea what to make of that grand epiphany that came through at a time when I really needed it, but it set this groundwork, and it helped me shift into a like, okay, wait a minute, that felt so true, that experience was so right that I can relax a little bit, and there's something about these psychedelics that I should be you know, further inquiring to play with. And so I did throughout my like early 20s, but I couldn't master the art of it. And getting into those really grand epiphanous places, I didn't understand that I needed large amounts and that I probably shouldn't be mixing it with alcohol. Um, because the smaller amounts, when I would do them, would just amplify my own anxiety and my own discomfort. So I ended up putting them aside and being like, these are really interesting, but I don't know how to use them really well. And they usually just make me more uncomfortable in my skin. And so I'm just not going to do them. And I didn't really touch them much for my, 20s and early 30s. And then once I found people using them intentionally, it was again, the same medicines, mushrooms, MDMA and LSD or versions thereof. However, I also discovered ayahuasca, which, you know, the moment somebody said it to me, I was like, ooh, what's that? What's that? You know? And I had this whole really interesting journey of working with it where I had done it 6 times over the course of 13 years, starting when I was 27, and I didn't think it worked right. And I was having these really weird, difficult physical experiences of super cramps and nausea. I passed out a couple of times, like really, like I'm walking to the bathroom and I fall over. And I, you know, I was inquiring with some teachers, hey, is this the definition of insanity? Trying the same thing over and over again and expecting different results? And the teachers were actually like, I don't know, I think there might be a piece for you. If you're feeling still drawn to it, perhaps continue. And though I started like blueprinting that you can move trauma through these altered states, it was with like mushrooms and LSD and MDMA. It wasn't until I really started seriously working with ayahuasca that the big shifts came for me. And it has been my main teacher.
Wow, your story is so similar to mine. It's crazy. Because I come from the same, you know, I grew up in the suburbs of California, and I always blame it on, like, that's why I did acid at 14. And had these pretty profound experiences at a young age. And then actually, I was living in New York, and right around 9/11, that was kind of a turning point where I just kind of like stopped everything for a while, and then got back into it when when I found out about the intentional usage of, you know, psilocybin, like, of course I would do mushrooms here and there, like going on a hike or, you know, doing random things here and there, like parties or festivals. But the intentional use and then the ayahuasca was where it's like, oh, okay. Like now this stuff is coming up from, you know, childhood or ancestral traumas that I thought were kind of like our upbringing, like in the past. That's in the past. It's over. It didn't happen, you know, or it happened so long ago, it doesn't matter anymore. And it was like, wow, ayahuasca is bringing this all up to be dealt with on this new level. And that's where the profound shift started happening. But damn, man, not easy, right? Like very hard work. So I'm curious, you know, in your path in the healing, when you were starting to work with ayahuasca and maybe you felt like it wasn't working and then it started to, how did this then impact, you know, the work that you were doing? Like, is that what inspired you to go then create these films around the healing, or and like, you know, put this work out there, or how did that come through?
Kind of, yeah,
come through the medicine.
So it's funny. I actually documented all of my, not all, but a lot of this journey, and I'm in the processes of starting to create my second feature film. And that's why I'm so excited to be here in Costa Rica right now and hunkered down. I finally have this like solid foundation where I'm like, I'm not traveling, guys. Stop telling me about cool things. I'm not going anywhere. I'm making this movie. And the movie is documenting, so ayahuasca didn't work for me. My old coping mechanisms of alcohol and sugar and coffee and just workaholism, that like pushing myself so hard and completely exhausting myself. I had run myself into the ground on a documentary shoot in Panama, and was like, I had to leave the shoot early, was so like adrenal fatigue, just completely shot. And I was like, all right, I have a subletter from my apartment in LA. Let's go to Peru. Let's go see if we can figure out how to get in relationship with ayahuasca. And I met a bunch of travelers who were all working with different shamans in the Iquitos area. And I told them, okay, I'm looking for someone to work with to maybe do some dietas and to figure out why am I not having these grand epiphanies? What's going on? And so I sat with all these different people, filmed my sitting with them, filmed my friends' travels, and filmed my own experiences. And what happened was two different shamans in different parts of the jungle in Iquitos gave me this diagnosis saying, you have a condition called pulsario, pocket of negative air and energy, and it's the result of undigested traumas. So it's like pocket here in my system. They're like, yeah, it's stopping the ayahuasca from getting up here. And so I did 2 1-week dietas, pretty cool, like intense experiences in very like in centers that were very accommodating for my extremely low budget. And you know, it was really rustic. It was really intense, but awesome. And great healing happened. Eventually me having a huge experience where ayahuasca came through and asked me if I wanted to create life. And I was like, wait, what do you mean? Like Mary Magdalene? Are we like talking Immaculate Conception here? What's Mary Magdalene? Mary, yeah. I got no answer. And then I just said, okay, well, I trust you. I feel this medicine. I feel trust for this medicine. So I said yes. And a bird came and poured some nectar into my throat. And I was told, you know, here, you're given life. This is the life of communication, the skill. And then after that, I was finally able to start, it was after that, like 9 months actually, that I was given the green light to make the healing powers. And so I was finally able to start telling the stories and actually started to make content that really felt alive for me, with me hosting. As a kid, I wanted to be an actress, and then I never took it serious. I was like, I'm not good enough to be in front of camera. And yet the steps, it fell into my lap with Mary Jane. And so, yeah, it's been this extraordinary journey and really interesting just to watch how these medicines work. I think the one thing I want to add is that what I've learned is that all those journeys that I thought were not working with the medicine, it was more like that all that trauma in my system was just very embedded into my cells and almost like a plaque. And that the medicine was working like a little chisel, like chipping at the edges of the plaque and loosening it up in places, and eventually making it so that I could really break through and then have these beautiful, extraordinary epiphanous experiences of healing. Yeah.
That is incredible. I've never even heard of that, the pocket, or the energetic block by with all the traumas. I have heard of, because I was actually on a dieta with a guy who wasn't experiencing anything the whole time. And my shaman just kept saying, well, there's some people that have, I forgot what it is, some enzyme missing in their stomach and they can't digest it and the DMT doesn't activate, something like that. But maybe it was actually this, who knows? I'm curious, with all this depth of work, dietas, ayahuasca, dealing and uncovering a lot of trauma, were you also doing any form of integration work? And if so, I would love to know a little bit more about what, and if not, what are your views on doing integration with this kind of, especially this powerful medicine like ayahuasca?
I think integration is one of the most important pieces of it, right? And I actually, it reminds me of one piece that I want to weave in here is that another tool that was very useful that didn't really become available to me is meditation, which I think is a big part of the integration process. And I always had been trying to meditate when I was still in my trauma, but I didn't. The anxiety I would become aware of was too painful for me to sit with. And I didn't really understand what I was working towards. And it wasn't until psychedelics started opening the doors to these altered states and that I was like, oh, that's what I'm working for. And then that helped me both get there faster in my meditation as well as be motivated to develop that discipline. But so I was working in parallel with my medicines, and then I went to India to do Kundalini teacher training. And then that allowed me, the two I would kind of, never at the same time, but they were both extremely instrumental in me getting where I'm at. So, I think that the meditation, the yoga is a part of the integration of slowing down and being present with what's going on in your system. For me, integration has always, I have a handful of other girlfriends that are all on their own journey of healing, and they're actually all therapists as well. I'm the only non-therapist. And so what we do is we'll do these weekly phone calls and help each other unpack whatever's going on in our lives. And it's been really valuable because they'll be like, oh, I see you going in your pattern over there again, and having somebody being able to point that out. I'm like, please give me the critical feedback. Please tell me when you see me doing that spiral thing so that I can, I trust you. And then journaling. I journal a lot. Right after a journey, I will also have a voice. I'll pull my phone out and put a voice memo sometimes while the medicine's even a little alive in my system, because so much happens in these journeys that you're easily forgetting, right? And I'm like, okay, let me put this all down here so that when I make my movie, I can remember it all too. But yeah, all of those pieces have been really helpful.
I love that. I've actually never thought of the voice memo one. I'm like, that would be good for me. Because yeah, I have a lot that's come through medicine, and sometimes it's almost overwhelming. It's like, what do I do with all this? Like I always say, if I could just put a plug from everything that comes through and just download it onto, paper. But I always trust that what's meant to come through, and I remember, and sometimes I'll remember it, like a month later, like, oh yeah, that thing, that little bit. I love this story, and thank you so much for sharing. And I agree, I personally don't understand how anyone works with these medicines and doesn't have some sort of a integration practice, whether it's meditation or, journaling or both, or therapy, somatic therapy, sound, whatever you need. But the whole point of it is okay, then we can actually make the change in our lives, bring our art out to the world, put something out there, make a change. It's not just, I believe personally, it's not just here for our own use and then nothing else. It's okay, well, why are we doing this healing? Yes, it's for our souls, but then what do we do with it? You know, and I do believe there's a point where our healing then becomes a healing path of service. And whether that's through making films or sharing your voice, or, you know, it doesn't have to be saving the planet, but it's like, what's the point of all of this to begin with? And why are we here? You know, what's this all about? So I love hearing these stories and how people have had these breakthroughs and been able to now put something out into the world. Now, talking about the work that you're up to now and that's coming through, and, you know, you can tell details or not, but I'm curious to know, how does this idea of sharing stories play a part, you know, in not only, you know, your journey, but then like the collective, right? Like this collective journey that we're all going through, the world ayahuasca ceremony that's happening right now on the planet. You know, why is it important? Because I have noticed, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's just the world we're in, but I think a lot of us have noticed there's more and more people putting film out there, writing books, you know, sharing their own healing journey. And why is this necessary?
Great question.
Do you think?
I feel like so many of us are isolated. You know, I feel like so many of us feel so alone in our journeys, and we've been taught as children, oh, honey, don't cry, don't be sad, don't be angry. We've been taught to disconnect from the information of our body. So we're not only isolated from each other because we're putting on this show that everything's great, we're isolated from ourselves. We're lonely in our own being. And what better way to create a path of connection than to relate to somebody else's story. Story, I think, is the most powerful tool of communication to get someone to go, oh my God, that was me. I feel exactly like that. I went through that thing. Oh, you found a way out. Oh, what was the way out? You know, and it's a journey. You get invested for a moment. You forget your own story. It's exciting. It's, you know, I think we all get to learn from each other and hear each other's things. When you say a thing a certain way, I might have heard it before, but when you said it, I really clicked. Thank you for saying it that way, right? And so I'm so excited to be seeing this exact thing of people everywhere starting to step up more and more. And I really want to, like, as I was saying earlier, it's like, healing was such a taboo in the past. People were like, oh, I'm ashamed this bad thing happened to me. Put a smile on, pretend it didn't happen. And so there's shame and all these awful emotions stuck in the middle of this, what could be a cathartic healing. And when we witness each other doing the healing, oh, it gives me permission to look at my shame. And what I've witnessed in my own journey is, as I do my healing, as I share it more and more, it's becoming a celebration. I am like, hey guys, the healing work that we're doing, this is like the coolest adventure ever. I can't imagine a more amazing way to be human on this earth. Like, let's heal our shit. Let's look at it. Let's be with it. And guess what? It goes away after you bring that attention to it. And the process of looking at it has taken me to India, to Peru, working with shamans. I've had so many wild adventures of it. So, and no one would know if I wasn't talking about it.
That's why it's important to share your medicine. That's what I call it. It's like we all have this medicine inside of us. And you started out by saying something so important about the isolation. I know, even, you know, it's interesting. I've always been very involved in spiritual communities and, you know, studied psychology and Buddhist community and on this path. And then when I went to my very first ayahuasca ceremony, and it was interesting, it was, you know, I got introduced through a friend. I literally had no one to talk to. Like, and I was living in New York City. You know, we have to also remember that there are people who are like quite literally isolated, or maybe they are actually the only person in their community that is on this path. And there I was, like, you know, even the friend that introduced me wasn't able to talk to me about the experience I had, because he actually hadn't even had an experience like that before. It was a DJ that I was kind of acquainted with that helped me process it. I mean, this was, you know, a long time ago, but I remember feeling that sense of like, who do I talk to about this? You know, these days, of course, now there's more people offering up services as, you know, integration coaches or integration circles, or now there are more films or the Lucid Newses of the world to turn to understand what you're going through, and that, yeah, there is nothing to be ashamed of. But I know it's, even now, I mean, there's still so many people, because I get them as clients who are like, well, no one knows I've been on this path. Like, or no one, I've never talked about this before. I've never talked about my alcoholic, parents, or my abusive past, or whatever it is, my trauma. And I do believe the more we're all able to share this is this interconnection, this knowing that we're not alone. This is a beautiful gift. We're doing this work. I do believe it's for a larger, it's for the collective on a large scale. It's not just our own lives and our ego-based experience, but it is the healing of the planet as a whole. So I love that you share this. And we all know on some level that this is, an issue in our society. It's like people feel so isolated, and even though we're so connected like never before, we have the internet, we have podcasts, we have blogs and 10,000 social media outlets, but then we're all disconnected and it doesn't make any sense.
I would love to add
I do believe it's, add please.
In one of my journeys, I had this vision of having a big needle and a big thread, and you have a big needle and a big thread, and all these integration coaches and community leaders and everybody who's actively involved in this, like, we're all weaving a big web. And I think this web of interconnectedness, as the mycelial network and fantastic fungi will show us, that like, this is how we grow. This is how we evolve. This is how we become stronger. This is how we feel whole in ourselves, because we are not isolated entities. That is not the truth of the nature of who we are. We are all parts, my favorite saying is, we're just God's finger puppets. God being, in my case, I like to call it the creative, energetic force driving the universe, not some dude up in the sky. But yeah, I think we're all part of consciousness, rediscovering who we are. And the more ways we can remind each other of that, the more we can remember that we are whole and perfect in our imperfections.
That's a beautiful, beautiful saying. Now, I'm curious, as someone who's kind of on the front lines with Lucid News and this, the healing documentaries you're doing, would you say that this explosive growth in psychedelics and sacred plant medicines and, the people that are now just turning, like I even get inquiries all the time, like, where can I do this? How can I work with these? Where do I find this? Because I do believe we also have, mental health crisis on our hands on some level. Do you feel that this whole growth is going in the right direction? Like, do you feel positive about this? Do you believe that it's here for a good reason, or do you think that this might just turn into yet another, another thing that gets exploited and, maybe used in the wrong way, or it's maybe just masking? What are your views on the direction it's going in?
I have a personal philosophy that I have adopted in everything that is all that is happening is an opportunity to grow. That means there's nothing bad and wrong in how it unfolds. Everything is an opportunity to learn something. And if you apply that lens to all, it allows you to relax a lot more. And two, it allows you to take what will come out of, like, the nuggets of wisdom and lessons. I think it's a little bit of a shit show. And if you've ever had a visual psychedelic experience, that's the nature of them sometimes. Sometimes it's very direct and will teach you something very clear. And other times it's all over the place in all the things. And I think us humans, we're like teenagers learning how to become more mature. We're barely stepping into what it is to be mature bits of consciousness. I think it's going to be messy. I think it's going to be hard. My hope is that that the reciprocity piece really teaches us how to do capitalism in a more mindful way. I think that I think that there's the downside is a lot of people will have a pretty big experience somewhere early on and think that that's the thing. And what I've learned in my own journey is that it takes a long time to really start to understand your programs. And it's taken me like, I've been very active on my own healing journey in the last like 5 years, maybe 6 now. And I'm just now beginning to feel like I am getting a bearing of where I'm at and who I am and understanding. And I mean, I had a lot of trauma. I mean, maybe people without so much trauma won't feel the same way. But I think it takes a long time and a lot of work. And it doesn't necessarily mean a lot of psychedelics, but I do think a lot of work of self-discovery, self-inquiry, and observation and meditation, and just becoming aware of who you are and what your programs are so that you can start to rewrite them and become more intentional about how you operate in the world. So yeah, we're going to have some messy learning curves, I think. And capitalism, I'm really curious to see. I feel like it's almost this race of like how many of the people that are engaged in this are becoming conscious of their own programs so that their programs aren't running them. That's like one of the runners in the race. And if there's that morphogenic field, is that the way to say it? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I sometimes butcher the word, but the idea is that, if 10 monkeys figure out a trick, suddenly it becomes available, or 100 monkeys figure out a trick, it becomes available to the collective subconscious. So I'm holding this vision that as some of us are rising up and becoming more aware of our programs, that catches on as these stories get into the media, as they become part of people's toolkit, that it starts to shift on some subconscious level. Not everybody has to do this deep work, and that as a runner in this race manages to really make some headway against these older systems that are really, operating at a loss and hurting us. So who knows how it will pan out? I have a lot of faith in our desire to learn and grow. I really have a lot of faith in that, and I think that will persevere even if we make a big mess of it all.
This is so perfectly said. I know I'm constantly saying, I'm like, I am always on the side of optimism because I do see the light in everything. I know it's not an easy journey. It's definitely going to be rough. I mean, it's kind of like, as above, so below. This is the same experience that we go through in, let's say, an ayahuasca journey. It's not all pretty dandy. I mean, for me, it's usually like the last 10 minutes. The rest is pretty rough, but it's like we're constantly peeling away at the layers. It's like these onion layers. And it's interesting you say, it's like, okay, just now you're getting this bearing of where you're at. And, I've been on this journey, what I feel like has been since I was about like 10 years old on some level. And even recently, I was actually in Costa Rica doing a very profound transformational retreat with some medicine as well. And my intention for the retreat, I was like, I just want to know who I am. And they're like, what? Like, you know who you are. I'm like, no, like on a new level. Like, it's like this next level of like, okay, there's like clearing and rebirthing and constant like clearing and rebirthing and like the patterning, like the awareness. And the more you have this awareness of like, oh, that's been running me for the last 40 something years. It's like, well, who am I now? Who am I now without that, And I agree with you. I do believe the more people are sharing the work like you are, making documentaries, sharing their stories, it plants a little spark in each heart of the human that it touches, and where they're like, wait a second, that sounds familiar. Let me look into what she's talking about. And it's like, maybe that's what sparks off the 100 monkey, like the collective shift into something that does serve better all of humanity and the planet. Like, that's my hope for capitalism. Trust me. I was in this really beautiful transformational program of sorts with my therapist, who's also a good friend of mine. And it was like learning a lot of somatic therapy techniques and working with medicines. And we had this mushroom journey. And my whole journey was all about capitalism. And I like wailed. I was like, man, if I wasn't in this room with 12 other people, I would just be bawling for like 5 hours straight. But I was like, how do we get there? Like, just interview Charles Eisenstein. I was like, just tell us the answers. Like, and it's the same thing. It's like, no one knows the answers, but this idea of like it's going to emerge through us. Like the more people are doing this healing work, taking a look at themselves, willing to maybe do the work to keep their ego in check, like I do believe something will emerge because, and it's like sitting there, right? We all know this is about to shift. There's something, and everyone's like, what is it?
Well, what I've gotten to play with in my own journeys is it's our belief and our holding a vision and agreeing that it is possible to move through it by simply fueling that perspective when we look at the future, holding that it's possible, putting our energy in and like investing and spending our time in that direction where we break through. I believe that that is so powerful. I think our belief is the most, where we put our attention on is the most powerful tool we have as beings on this earth. And I mean, that's why we've got Facebook and all these big companies fighting so much for our views. Our attention is fuel. And so can we put our attention into a system where we shift out of scarcity, where we shift fully into reciprocity, into right relationship, into inclusivity, into, how do we do it? I think we just believe it's possible, but that's easier said than done, right?
Gotta watch the mind. Believe. Well, Mareesa, tell people a little bit more about what you have coming up, where people can find you, if you want to share anything that's maybe in the pipeline over the next, 6 to 12 months. Like, what can we look out for?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned before, I'm editing this feature film and we'll probably be needing to do some crowdfunding around getting the editing team properly in place because it's not going to be all me. But I'm very excited. This is definitely the culmination of my life and like my entire life's work. So that's one of the biggest things. And then also for Lucid News, I'm launching a new reincarnation of a storytelling series where we'll be interviewing therapists, and I'll be working with them to help them share their story of how they understand trauma and healing to work. So sort of the architecture of trauma and healing and how their own personal story weaves into it. So, haven't completely nailed it's Adventures of the Psyche, like season 2 basically is what that's going to be. So I'm really excited for that. And I normally have 20 other projects. For once in my life, I'm, like I said, creating this solid foundation and sinking in and giving those my attention.
Beautiful.
And I guess the other part of your question is, for anybody who wants to find me, I'm on lucid.news or my own website, thehealingpowers.com. And on Instagram, which is probably the best place to keep track with me, is Mareesa_Stertz.
Awesome, Mareesa. Well, we'll have all your links right here in the show notes. And if you guys don't subscribe to Lucid News' emails, that's where I get all the information. It's been really helpful, and it's obviously made by good people doing good work. And I highly suggest you subscribe and stay on top of what's going on in this whole world of psychedelics and healing. So Mareesa, thank you so much for being with us. It was such an honor to hear all your stories. And I'm so glad you are doing this very important work on the planet. The world needs it right now.
Thank you so much, Beth. Thanks. It was such a joy to be here.
Thank you.